Now, 2 Benin Bronzes have been returned to a traditional place in Nigeria, and this is more than a century after they were looted by British troops. Explorers and colonisers stole the artefacts from the Benin Kingdom, now known as southwest Nigeria. The artefacts are among Africa's most significant heritage objects.
The British Museum says they were created as early as the 16th century. The return of the artifacts raises hopes that thousands more could be finally returned to their ancestral homes.
You'll be shocked at the spread of these artifacts. They are all over the place, up to New Zealand and Australia, the United States, Japan, all over Europe. So they must come back here because this is their nativity. That aside, these are not just art, There are things that underline and signify our spirituality.
The 2 artifacts were handed over to the Nigerian High Commission in October by the University of Aberdeen and Cambridge University's Jesus College, but were yet to return to their ancestral home.
This is a change of narrative. These works were removed in 1897, and coming back 125 years after so much negotiation, just makes everyone happy. And you can see the crowd here. People are so excited to see the return of these 2 treasures, I call them, not objects, because they have very strong philosophical and cultural meaning for the people of Benin. So it's really an amazing event.
They will be preserved scientific. This 21st century, it's not the ancient days. Even in the ancient days, they were preserved with their own technology. But we have better technology now.
The return is another milestone in a years-long fight by African nations to recover looted works, as numerous European institutions are grappling with the cultural legacies of colonialism. French art historians estimate that about 90% of Africa's cultural heritage is believed to be in Europe. Musée du Quai Branly Jacques Chirac in Paris alone holds around 70,000 African objects, and London's British Museum tens of thousands more.
To give us some insights on just how significant this is, we're now joined by writer and art historian Percy Marbando. Thank you so much indeed for joining us, and welcome to the programme.
Well, thanks for having me.
All right.
Thanks for having me. It's good to be talking to you on such a joyous moment.
So we saw some very happy people in Nigeria there with the return of these bronzes. For the layperson who has no idea, they might be just saying, what's the fuss about 2 bronzes?
Well, these bronzes form part of a larger collection that was looted by colonialists in 1800s. I think it was around 1874, if I'm not wrong. And so it's about, the recovery of memory. It's about a kind of righting of a great historical wrong committed by British soldiers who went into Benin Kingdom, ravaged, raped, and stole. A very, Benin state was a very sophisticated state that had culture, that had economy, that had all sorts of, artifacts of civilization, and it was, for all intents and purposes, a symbol that was going against the narrative of the time of an Africa that was dark without history and without culture. So these artifacts were a kind of contradiction to that narrative. So they are taken into Europe, spread all over Europe. We saw Germany is having its own conversation, France is having its own conversation, Britain is having its own conversation around returning these artifacts. As you can see, they're spread all over Europe. That's how much there is. So these 2, as you ask, what's the fuss? They represent a step in a long journey of recovery by African peoples everywhere, not just what's happened in Edo State in Nigeria, but all of us on the continent can look at this moment as a kind of moment of inspiration and hope that justice is possible, recovery is possible. Now, you must remember, this is also happening on the backdrop of the announcement last year by the architect David Ajay of a new museum that is going to be built in Edo State for these artifacts that were stolen as they are being repatriated. So, it's part of a larger conversation about what they could mean to the people today, having been stolen such a long time ago under such terrible conditions.
And we're talking about centuries-old artifacts here, and I guess the big issue here is the value that these statues represent, to the cultures and to the people of the time. Unlike today, perhaps we go to the market, buy a few ornaments and place them over the fireplace. These represent quite a lot about and for the people at the time.
Yeah, look, these museums were in a palace. They were part of a larger collection of artifacts that told the story of the people of Benin and the royal house of Benin. So they were kind of keeper of memory. So if you follow them with the panels, they are kind of telling a story. So, in the palace would be, as you walk through the corridors of the palace, these, plates and panels in bronze, and these little statues would be, placed there to tell you the story of the people and the royal house that existed, the kingdom itself. So by stealing these artifacts, they were not only stealing beautiful artifacts that were expertly produced, but also the memory that they kept, the story that they told. So the crime was much more than just loot of things to sell and trade with, as it were, but really a theft of the soul of the people. And this is what this recovery kind of represents, the possibility of healing, the possibility of recovery of that network.
Talk to us a little bit about the journey of these artifacts. What was happening? British troops would land and other countries, and as part of the process of war, they would just grab things, put them on the ship and go home. Where do they end up, these objects?
Well, I mean, this is, as you would have seen with what happens when Western powers come in and insist on regime change. What happened with the artifacts in Libya just recently here, what happened with artifacts in Iraq. So what happens, these soldiers come in on, instruction by political principles to effect regime change, really, and destabilize the regions. And the wealth of the nation, is then taken. At the time they get on ships, and individual, individual soldiers would then, take, and some would be, given to the state. And, some of these were being sold and traded through markets over time. I mean, there is a documentary that tracks what the overhead and how it is sold. One general, one collector, and ultimately finding its way into the British Museum. So a lot of people would have made a good fortune for themselves on the back of this thing before it arrives at the museum. By arriving at the museum, at least that afforded us a time to a chance to trace and be able to to hold a state to account for at least a part of that terrible story.
A lot of it might still be in private hands, I guess, and we might never recover it because we don't know where it is. But the stuff that's been in museums and state institutions, they've known a long time the origins of these artworks. How have they been able to justify keeping them for so long?
Part of the absurd narrative that has sort of emerged as the campaigns by various countries on the continent to recover the stolen artifact has been that they are safer and better kept for by European museums, that they are no longer just the preserve of the people from whom they were stolen, but they are now part of a larger global heritage that should be shared. So then, things are taken from people, and once they are located, and different nations know where their heritage is, in the process of recovery is then met with a kind of resistance that pretends to be a kind of global benevolence for shared culture and shared heritage. We've heard various stories. I mean, there are countries that have only just been, convinced in the last year of the justness of the repatriation of these objects. I mean, the British Museum itself was very reluctant. I mean, I think the Germans were among the first to kind of restore their resistance and really come to terms with the fact that these are not theirs to keep. And whether or not the nation from whom they were stolen has the capacity to look after them or not, it's not a decision for them to make, but that of the people to whom these things belong. So we have seen various kinds of narratives being pushed as an excuse and reason for why people should not return these objects. But thank God, as the movement of time goes and we become resilient in our demands as a continent, justice is possible.
I mean, these are small steps, aren't they? I mean, two precious relics being brought back. But I'm reading some alarming statistics here. They suggest that some 90% of Africa's cultural heritage may be in Europe. One museum in France alone has about 70,000 African objects. That is almost criminal.
Yeah, well, I mean, this only gives you a window into how total the colonial assault was on cultural development. I mean, for instance, just if you were to bring it here at home, we have the story of the Mabandu civilization right here near the Limpopo River, and you and I had not known for the longest time that this civilization had been producing artifacts with gold. And you can go to the Javits Center in Victoria, where they've been held, but they've been held in secret by the apartheid state, and it's only now with the advent of democracy here that we begin to learn about some of the things that were here. Now you can imagine with the distance of the oceans across the Mediterranean, how much is kept in secret, let alone those that we know, because they are in museums that we can visit and identify. So it is probably, much more than what has been reported by the people.
And I suppose the crime is, as an African, I have to get on a plane, fly to Europe, pay to get into a museum to see objects that my great-great-grandfather made.
Yeah.
I know. Did you hear me?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I caught a little bit of that. You're breaking.
Yes.
But I got the sense of what you're saying. Look, this is part of the absurdity of the thing, the absurdity of the proposition of what historically was called the white man's burden. The idea that Europe has the burden to look after all of us, to civilize all of us. And we have to go to Europe like a child to a father or a child to a parent to learn something. It is part of the absurdity of the history from which we emerge. But I do think that as we become resolved in our march towards restoring ourselves and recovering some of this heritage, or in fact all of this heritage that is ours, we will make Europe better as we become better ourselves, and we will hold it to the standard that it purports to live by, all the civilizing story that it has told. Perhaps it might begin to believe it in itself.